Okay, let's jump in. If you're asked where modern science began, you might, instinctively say ancient Greece.
Or maybe Roman engineering. If we're talking about systematic medicine, the first people to really formalize it, we have to go back further.
To the cradle of civilization itself, Mesopotamia, that land between the Tigris and Euphrates
Right.
rivers.
And these people were true pioneers. They weren't just guessing. What's really fascinating is they didn't separate the body and the mind.
So health wasn't just about your physical condition.
Not at all. Their whole view was that health was this necessary balance between the physical world and the spiritual world. If you were sick, it meant that balance was broken.
Broken how? Like you'd angered a god or something.
Exactly, or maybe you'd been targeted by a bad spirit.
Yeah.
It was evidence of a deeper problem.
And this is where they gave the world a revolutionary idea: documentation.
They realized just learning by trial and error wasn't enough. If you write down what you see, what symptoms appear, and what treatments work, that knowledge can last forever.
So they used that famous wedge-shaped writing, cuneiform.
Right, etching thousands of medical notes onto clay tablets. This idea of keeping a written record is maybe the single most important thing they gave to science.
It's like they were building the first medical database.
They absolutely were.
Mhm.
So every new generation of healers didn't have to start from zero. But because of this dual view of illness, part physical, part spiritual, they ended up with two very different kinds of experts.
Okay, let's break those down. First, you had the Ashipu.
The Ashipu.
Now, this wasn't a doctor in our sense of the word. They were the spiritual specialist, kind of like a priest or an exorcist.
Yeah, their job was to figure out the spiritual root cause. Was it a curse? A bad omen? Divine anger?
So how did they treat that? You can't put a bandage on a curse.
Well, their treatments were really complex. They used rituals, specific prayers, and symbolic actions. For instance, they might make a little clay figurine to represent the disease or the demon causing it.
And then what?
They'd ritually destroy it, burn it, or break it. The belief was that as the symbol was destroyed, the spiritual sickness would be forced out of the patient's body.
Wow. They also used divination, right? Looking at the stars and dreams.
Yep. They used astrology and dream interpretation to decide the best time to administer a treatment. But the Ashipu wasn't working alone. You also had the second expert,
Yasu.
the Asu. And this person was the complete opposite. They focused only on the physical body.
So they were the ones looking at the symptoms, mixing the medicines, treating the actual injuries.
Exactly. If you had a cough or a broken leg, the Asu was the person who prescribed an herbal remedy or an ointment.
So how did that work? Did the two of them, argue over the patient?
Not at all. And that's the key. They saw the roles as complementary, not competing.
So you needed both.
You needed both for a complete recovery. The Aishipu would handle the spiritual root cause, and the Asu would mend the physical body. It was a totally integrated system.
Okay, so if you wanted to become one of these physical doctors, an ASU, where did you go? There weren't universities back then.
No universities. Instead, you'd enter a really strict apprenticeship. It was years of intense, on-the-job training, working directly with an experienced doctor.
And what was the curriculum like?
It was all built around those clay tablets. Students had to study and memorize thousands of medical texts, just exhaustive lists of symptoms, diseases, instructions for mixing medicines.
Imagine having to memorize an entire library etched in stone.
It took incredible dedication. And the centerpiece of all this knowledge was a collection of texts we call the Diagnostic Handbook.
And this wasn't just a list of sicknesses. This was something more, wasn't it?
It was basically the first algorithm for healthcare. It allowed healers to move beyond just listing symptoms to actually predicting the course of an illness.
How did it do that?
It used conditional logic, an ancient if-then system. A text might say something like, if a patient has a fever for 3 days and their eyes are yellow, then the disease will likely get worse and the prognosis is bad on the 10th day.
So the doctor wasn't just looking at the patient. They were cross-referencing what they saw with centuries of recorded data.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This systematic, evidence-based approach is, it's still the fundamental way a doctor diagnoses you today, and it all started there.
That careful documentation fed right into how they examined a patient. They were meticulous observers.
Incredibly meticulous. They did a full physical check. They weren't just listening to what the patient said.
Right. They were looking for specific signs. They checked skin color. Was it pale or yellowish?
They'd check body temperature. They examined the shape and the clarity of the eyes. And they recorded all the symptoms by body part headaches, chest pains, joint aches.
All of that data was needed to use the diagnostic handbook correctly.
And once the problem was identified, the The Asu turned to their pharmacy, which was entirely sourced from the natural world.
They used plants like mint and mustard, right?
Yeah, for their soothing properties. But their most amazing discovery, probably by accident, was willow bark.
And this is a direct line to modern medicine.
It really is. They used willow bark to treat pain and reduce swelling. Today, we know willow bark contains salicylic acid.
The active ingredient in aspirin.
The active ingredient in aspirin. They found a major pharmacological breakthrough just by observing its effects.
It wasn't just plants, though. They also used minerals.
Things like salt, saltpeter, and sulfur. They'd grind them into paste and ointments to treat skin infections and wounds.
And how did they prepare all this?
They had really clever ways to extract the healing properties. They often boiled ingredients in water or, interestingly, in beer.
And to make the medicine actually, edible?
They used honey, milk, and animal fats, both to make it taste better and to act as a base for ointments you could apply to the skin.
Their skills went beyond just mixing remedies, though. They were performing basic surgery.
Which is just remarkable, considering the huge risk of infection back then. They had surprisingly good tools, too. Sharp knives made of bronze or even obsidian.
What were they using them for?
To clean out deep wounds, remove infected tissue, things like that.
Yeah.
If you had a serious injury, they knew how to manage it.
They could set broken bones with splints?
Yep, using splints made of wood or reeds. And for bleeding, they were experts at applying pressure with linen bandages. They could even drain abscesses.
And they had an early form of antiseptic, which is fascinating.
It is. When cleaning a deep cut, they didn't just use water. They would wash the wound with oil and wine.
The oil would act as a barrier, and the wine?
The wine, because of the alcohol, was an unintentional disinfectant. It slowed the growth of bacteria that could cause deadly infections. That was a high-risk move that must have saved a lot of lives.
Now, beyond treating individual people, they also understood that public health was crucial, especially in their crowded cities.
Absolutely. Cleanliness wasn't a luxury for them. It was a matter of survival. They managed water on a huge scale.
They built canals and pipes to bring in fresh water from the rivers.
Complex networks of them, yeah. Bringing clean water into the city centers for drinking and washing was a primary defense against disease.
And they also dealt with sanitation. Some of the bigger houses had early toilets and drainage systems.
Right, using gravity to carry waste away from living areas. That was a huge step in controlling the spread of disease.
So the doctors themselves were promoting basic hygiene, like hand washing.
They were. They were basically practicing the core ideas of germ theory thousands of years before it was ever understood.
The government took all of this so seriously that medicine was actually written into the law.
It was. This brings us to the famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the first written legal codes ever. And it has specific rules for doctors.
What kind of rules?
It created real accountability. For example, the code set out the exact payment a surgeon should get for a successful operation on a wealthy person versus on a slave.
So it established medicine as a formal, respected profession.
It did, but that respect came with a massive risk. There was a dark side to that accountability.
Okay.
If a surgeon made a serious mistake, say an operation caused a noble patient to lose an eye or even die from carelessness,
What happened?
the law was severe. The punishment could be the severing of the surgeon's own hand.
Wow. So they took medical standards incredibly seriously. It was high-stakes work.
And they needed those high standards because life back then was full of health challenges. The marshy rivers meant mosquitoes, which led to fevers, probably like malaria,
And the climate, right. Hot and dusty.
which caused constant eye infections from the sand. Then in the damp winters, you'd get respiratory problems.
And stomach issues from the water were probably a constant risk, no matter how good their canals were.
Always. Doctors had to be ready for all of it. But we should also mention the unsung heroes of Mesopotamian health.
Who were they?
Women. While the formal Asu doctors were usually men, women were the main caregivers in every home. And they held the specialized, respected role of expert midwives.
So they were in charge of childbirth.
Exactly. Their knowledge was practical, passed down for generations. They knew which herbs to use, which chants to say to protect the mother and the baby. They were the backbone of the population's survival.
So when you look at the whole system, the two types of healers, the laws, the focus on public health, it's clear this wasn't just some primitive first attempt.
Not at all. It's a direct foundation for our own medical system. Their knowledge of natural remedies traveled to Egypt, to Greece.
But the biggest legacy is that diagnostic method. The careful observation, checking it against a library of past cases, and then predicting what will happen next.
That is the fundamental process doctors still use today. They understood that to be healthy, you have to treat the whole person and their environment.
They created a medical blueprint that has, in many ways, stood the test of time.
It absolutely has.
See you next time.